Welcome back. It is day 54 of our 90-day New Testament reading plan with New Life Youth. My name is Christian. Thank you for joining me today. Today we start the book of Galatians. It's a shorter one, 6 chapters, so we'll finish this up in just a couple of days. But let's go ahead and get into our reading, Galatians 1 through Galatians 3. Now, Paul, he's writing this letter to the church of Galatia. Now, Galatia is a region, unlike some of the other letters we've seen where Paul's writing to a specific city. Galatia is a region, and this region includes cities like Antioch, Derbe, Lystra, Iconium, and more. So if we're thinking about it regionally for ourselves, like it'd be like if Paul was writing a letter to Wisconsinites. He says not just one church, but all of Wisconsin is who he is writing to in this letter. But yeah, that's the idea of Galatia. It's a region of churches, not just one singular church where issues are happening. But Paul, this is also his first letter that he wrote, period. And so we don't have an exact date of when this was written, but we can estimate right around 48 AD. That's a pretty well thought out estimate of when it was written. But being that this is one of Paul's first letters, we kind of see this tone that's a little bit different from these other letters that we've read so far. Paul's a little bit more fiery, a little bit more zealous. He kind of is just calling things the way they are and just calling things out. I think there is something that is learned for pastors and teachers and preachers where when you're young, you kind of just spit things out, call them as they are. You're fiery, you're zealous, and a lot of not aggression, but you're just really a loose cannon even sometimes. But Paul here, we're seeing almost a little bit of that, but there's this lesson that is learned as a pastor where as you mature, as you get older, how to deliver a message. When you're a little bit more seasoned, you can deliver a message that can cut to the heart, but it's also gentle and loving and caring. And so I think we see that later for Paul, like in Corinthians, there are some of the things that he says, like he's just expressing his love still for them. But here, even like in Galatians 3, it's like, you foolish Galatians. And so he's a little bit more intense, a little bit more fiery. And so it's kind of interesting to see from Paul. But this letter to the church of Galatia really can be summed up in a couple of ideas. Is Paul's authority in his apostleship and the gospel. We are dealing with a church, or really a series of churches, because it's to multiple churches that have seen an attack against them and against Paul. And some of that attack is actually coming from within, from the Jewish believers and converts within. And so in this church or in this region, we can call back some of the issues that Paul ran into previously from his missionary journey. If we look back to Acts 13 and 14, I'll let you take a look back there. But if you look to Acts 14 specifically, we see that this is the moment where Paul was stoned and thought to be dead. And then he gets up and goes back and preaches in the city. And so this is some of the stuff that Paul is dealing with. These Jews were and there was the Jews who were leading that charge. The Jews were very hostile towards Paul. And so we are still seeing that throughout. But what's happening in these churches is that when Paul came in, he preached the gospel of Jesus, and there are these Jews who became Christians, and these Jewish converts are basically saying, well, Paul, he's right. Like we believe what Paul's saying, but he's only got some of the picture. There's a few things he's gotten wrong. And they've started to call Paul into question. What they're calling into question in Paul's work with these Gentiles, because that was his large focus, is this need to commit to Jewish tradition, largely revolving around the idea of circumcision, because when they were these other converts, they were still sticking to a lot of their Jewish traditions. And they're saying, well, we have these traditions about Sabbath, we have these laws about the food. We can't be certain if you're actually following through on those. Like when you go home, we don't know if you're following through on those. But you know what we can verify is whether or not you are circumcised. It's a physical proof that you are following through on this choice to follow Jesus. And so we're relying or reverting to this idea. These Jews are still holding these people to this same ideal, like this same test of the circumcision of the old Jewish traditions. And also they're coming in, these Jews are coming in and saying, well, Paul, is preaching just a soft gospel. He's preaching an easy path to salvation. And so what Paul does is he rebuts all of this, and he really just expresses his authority. He's like, I wasn't sent by men. I was sent by God. I had this conversion on Damascus. I had this encounter with Jesus, and he is the one who sent me. I wasn't sent by men. Other apostles, they were sent by other men, not me. I was sent by God. He is the supreme authority. On top of that, Paul's saying, like, hey, I've also spent time with the apostles. I've also been accepted by the other apostles. I've spent time with the big three, Peter, James, John. I've spent time with these guys. And not only have I spent time with them, but they've accepted everything that I've brought to them. They've agreed with my gospel. They've agreed with my approaches. The only thing they encouraged me on was to continue to remember the poor. Like, everything that I'm doing is approved, not just by God, but there are other men who you guys are looking to, other apostles that you're looking to. Like, I'm approved by all of these people. Paul also makes it clear, Jesus fulfilled the law. So if we're still going to use the law as a benchmark of salvation, then Jesus died in vain. Like, there was no point for Jesus to die if we are still using the law to determine salvation for other people. There was no point for Jesus to die if we are still using the law to determine salvation. So Paul is really rebutting all of these things, but a lot of this even comes back to the heart of the matter, like the heart postures, right? And so if we remember back, Paul, he made sure that Timothy was circumcised because Timothy was Greek and uncircumcised. The heart behind it all was so that Timothy would not be a hindrance while preaching to these Jews or sharing in the synagogues, or even the ability to share in a synagogue, the need to be circumcised. And so a lot of that came down to the heart of the matter, right? And so a lot of these issues that we're talking about, we've talked about, are covered already, I think. Righteousness by faith. It's not by works. Paul's authority, his apostleship. But all of these things were such sticking points for these new Jewish believers, for the early church. They're coming out of such strong Jewish roots that it's difficult for them to let go of these old habits and traditions. And really, Christianity is born out of Judaism. And so it makes sense that they're having a hard time letting go of the past. And so Paul, like with some of these other churches too, he is bringing them back to the ideas of faith and righteousness by faith. He's bringing them back to Abraham, which was a huge callback for all Jews. These Jewish converts are the ones that are causing the trouble in these churches. And so Paul, while his focus largely was the Gentile audience, he really needs to get these Jewish converts on board too with the true gospel, because they are accepting some of the gospel, but they're pushing on other ideologies. And it's just not right. These other ideologies that they're pushing onto other people. And so Paul needs to get these people on board. He needs to get them all on board back to the idea of what the true gospel of Jesus is. One of the interesting things in this chapter, and then we'll close here, is this issue between Paul and Peter. Peter is the one who had these visions of clean versus unclean food. But it seems here now in chapter 2 that there is some kind of peer pressure that he has succumbed to, or some of these gripes from the Jewish converts. And he has either done this, he's either backtracked on what he once said and believed, or what is more likely, and which I would believe, is that he is he is simply remaining quiet on letting these Jews push their ideologies onto these new believers, specifically the Gentiles, and it's just out of a peer pressure. It's a peer pressure issue. In any case, whatever Peter's stance was, Paul comes in and he takes a strong stance and he sets Peter right. It almost seems like that Peter needs that time every once in a while. Peter needs somebody to set him straight every once in a while. Paul was forthcoming enough to confront him on this issue in public, as a matter of fact. Around the dinner table is where this was happening. And so Paul sets him straight and is like, hey, you're the one who said there's no clean and unclean. Why are you making these Gentiles go through this process? Why are you making them get circumcised? Why are you making them follow all these extra laws? Like, why are you putting these heavy weights on them? And Peter might have been like, no, like we're not doing that. But really, like they are doing that. Even if they try to backtrack on what was happening there, they were doing that. And so Paul sets them straight on this issue. But here's the deal: is we need to stand firm in the gospel. The big issue here with these Jews influencing the church is that these new believers are so young and so impressionable in their faith. We don't need, especially like I'm thinking about new believers, like we don't need to heap on heavy weights and heavy burdens for them to carry out their faith. We don't need to add on extra weight for a new believer. So why are we doing that? And that's what these Jewish converts are doing. But also we need to stand firm in what the true gospel is. When we see others who are adding on heavy burdens and heavy weights, like, hey, we need to be able to call that out with those other believers too. And so we're seeing Paul and Peter in this situation. But these young, impressionable believers, they just latch onto whatever they are taught, even if the source is wrong. And so something we've talked about plenty before is vet all of our resources. We need to vet all of our resources that we listen to. We can't just assume that everything we hear is right, everything we hear is good, or with good intention. And so always, always, always test everything against the word of God. That is a practice for all of us in every circumstance, in every situation. Just because someone's standing behind a camera and a microphone, it does not mean that they're right. And so even with me, that's why I say, test everything I say against the word of God. And hopefully it lines up with your spirit. And so, but always, always, always just test everything against the word of God. That's a good practice for all of us. But that really does it for today, in today's reading plan. And so, this is so much about Paul's authority in his apostleship. This is about the foundations of the gospel and Paul reestablishing that with this church. So feel free, let us know. What are you learning? Let us know here on YouTube. Let us know on YouVersion in our Bible plan. And we hope to see you tomorrow.